The rain was merciless that evening, painting the glass walls of the mansion with silver streaks. Richard Hale, one of the richest men in the city, had just returned from a meeting when he noticed a faint figure outside the garden gate. Through the downpour, he saw his maid, Maria, standing alone, soaked to the bone, her hands pressed to her face as if trying to hide her tears. Something about that fragile silhouette stopped him cold. For years, Richard had prided himself on being practical, distant, the kind of man who solved problems with money, not emotion. But that night, something pierced the walls around his heart. He watched as Maria tried to compose herself, pretending to adjust the garbage bin as if crying in the storm was just part of her duties. The sight was unbearable. It wasn't just sadness in her. It was despair. He stepped outside despite the rain, his polished shoes sinking into the mud. "Maria," he called softly. She froze. When she turned, her eyes widened in terror, as if being caught crying was worse than the cold biting her skin. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice trembling. "It won't happen again." "Won't happen again?" he repeated, his tone gentler now. "You're standing in the rain, crying like your world's collapsing. What's going on?" But she just shook her head. Her lips quivered and her tears mingled with the rain. "Please, Mr. Hale, I can't lose this job. Please don't fire me." Her words struck him harder than any storm. That moment would haunt him for days, the way she begged, the way fear outweighed her pain. He had no idea that behind those tears hid a story that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Richard couldn't focus on anything else. The image of Maria crying in the rain lingered in his mind like an unfinished melody. She had always been quiet, polite, almost invisible, the kind of person you'd never notice unless she was gone. Yet now her pain had become impossible to ignore. Who was this woman, really? What had driven her to such silent suffering under his very roof? He tried to convince himself that it wasn't his business. She was an employee, nothing more. But his heart refused to listen. For the first time in years, Richard felt something other than ambition or pride. He felt compassion. And beneath that compassion was a strange sense of guilt, as if he had been blind for too long to the lives that kept his own running smoothly. There was something about the way Maria had begged not to be fired, as though she carried not only her own survival, but someone else's too. The trembling in her voice wasn't fear of losing money, it was fear of losing everything. Richard needed to know why. That question, why, would lead him down a path of discovery, heartbreak, and redemption. He would learn that sometimes the richest people are those who give, not those who own. And sometimes, a single act of kindness can rewrite an entire life. Before we begin this emotional journey, take a deep breath. If you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or desperate to hold on to hope, this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below the city or country where you're watching from. Your words help these stories reach more hearts around the world. The morning after the storm, the mansion glistened under a soft gray light. The scent of wet earth and jasmine drifted through the open windows. Richard sat at the long oak table, untouched breakfast before him, distracted by the faint clinking of dishes coming from the kitchen. He could hear Maria humming quietly, a tune so fragile it seemed to hold back tears. She entered the dining room, eyes lowered as usual. Her dark hair was still damp from the rain, neatly tied back, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured his coffee. Richard studied her carefully, noticing the small bruises on her wrists and the hollow shadows beneath her eyes. They told stories her lips refused to share. "Maria," he said softly, "you caught a terrible storm last night. Are you feeling all right?" She froze, the coffee pot trembling in her grip. "Yes, sir, I'm fine." But her voice betrayed her. It cracked at the edges like glass under pressure. He waited for her to continue, but she didn't. She finished pouring and stepped back, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the floor. There was something haunting about her silence. It wasn't defiance. It was fear. A quiet kind of fear that made her shrink, as though life had taught her not to be seen. "Sit," Richard said unexpectedly. "Please." Her eyes shot up in confusion. "Sir?" "Sit down for a moment. You're shaking." She hesitated, glancing at the door, then slowly sat at the edge of the chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Why were you crying last night?" he asked. Her breath hitched. The question hung between them like thunder before the strike. "It was nothing, sir. I promise. Just personal matters." "Personal matters don't make someone stand in the rain," he replied quietly. "You don't need to hide whatever's hurting you." Tears welled up again, glimmering in her eyes. "If I tell you, you'll think I'm weak or ungrateful." "I don't think that," he said. "I think you're someone who's trying to survive." Her lip quivered. "My son, sir. He's sick. I send every cent I earn to pay for his medicine. Last night I got a call. The pharmacy won't give it to him anymore. I owe too much." Her voice broke completely. "He's only 7. Richard's chest tightened. He leaned back, the world blurring for a moment. A child, suffering quietly somewhere while his mother cleaned his floors and hid her pain. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I don't want pity," she whispered. "People like me don't get sympathy. We just keep working until something gives." The silence that followed was heavy, but something shifted inside Richard. A memory of his own mother who had once scrubbed dishes in strangers' houses before he built his empire. He realized how far he'd drifted from that world, from empathy itself. "Maria," he said finally, "you're not alone in this. I'll help you. Whatever your boy needs." Her eyes widened, disbelief and hope colliding all at once. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. For the first time since she'd come to work there, Maria smiled. A small, trembling smile that carried more gratitude than words ever could. As the sun broke through the clouds outside, Richard knew this was only the beginning. He didn't yet realize that helping her would soon uncover secrets darker and more personal than he ever imagined. The days following that conversation were different. The mansion, once filled only with the sounds of ticking clocks and polite silence, now carried something softer, a quiet awareness between two souls who had both known loss in their own ways. Richard found himself watching Maria not as an employer, but as a human being, noticing how she moved with care, how her exhaustion hid beneath her grace. He arranged for his assistant to contact the pharmacy and clear Maria's debt. The next morning, he handed her a small envelope. "It's taken care of," he said simply. Maria froze, staring at the paper in disbelief. "Sir, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not charity," he replied. "It's fairness. You've worked here for years, Maria. Consider it what you should have earned long ago." Her eyes filled again, but this time with gratitude instead of fear. "You don't understand what this means," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said softly, "but I'd like to." That moment, that fragile exchange, cracked something open in both of them. It was as though the walls of class and silence had begun to crumble brick by brick. Later that week, Richard asked his driver to take him to the address Maria had once listed as her residence. He didn't tell her. A part of him felt guilty, but another part needed to understand the truth she wasn't saying. When he arrived, he found not a home, but a small collapsing structure on the edge of the city. Rusted roof, broken windows, and a faint smell of mold and despair. A woman from the neighborhood approached him cautiously. "You looking for Maria?" she asked. "She doesn't live here anymore. Got evicted 3 months ago." Richard's heart sank. "Do you know where she went?" "She stays near the old train station now, renting a single room. Works herself to death, that one. Never complains. All for her boy." He thanked her and left, his thoughts heavy. Back at the mansion, he found Maria quietly polishing the silver trays. Her movements were steady, but her eyes carried the kind of fatigue that no rest could fix. He wanted to tell her he'd gone there, but he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he said, "How's your son doing?" Her expression softened. "Better, thanks to you, sir. He's breathing easier now." That night, as Richard stood by the window watching the rain begin again, he realized how profoundly her pain had touched him. He had wealth, power, influence, yet none of it had ever made him feel as alive as helping her did. But beneath that tenderness, a shadow stirred. Why had she never mentioned the eviction? What else was she hiding? The next morning, an envelope appeared on his desk. Inside was a small photograph, a young boy with large brown eyes and a shy smile. On the back, in delicate handwriting, it said, "Thank you for giving my son another chance." Richard smiled, until he noticed something strange. The hospital stamp at the corner of the photo read, "St. Bridget's Orphanage, not Medical Center." A chill ran through him. Why would her son's picture come from an orphanage? That night, he confronted her gently. "Maria, I saw the photograph. It says St. Bridget's Orphanage." Her face went pale. The room seemed to lose its air. "Please, Mr. Hale, I can explain." "Then tell me," he urged. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He's not my son, by blood. I found him abandoned in a shelter when he was 2. I couldn't leave him. They said if I took him, I'd lose my job. So I raised him in secret. I told everyone he was mine, because no one helps a woman who's just kind." Richard stood frozen. Her lie wasn't born from deceit. It was born from love. In a world that had given her nothing, she had created her own reason to live. And as he looked at her trembling hands, he realized something deeper. She had more courage in her quiet sacrifice than he had ever found in all his fortune. The following week, Richard couldn't shake Maria's confession from his mind. Every night he replayed her trembling voice. "They said if I took him, I'd lose my job." It wasn't pity he felt. It was something deeper, something almost sacred. That a woman with nothing had still chosen love over safety. He had spent years chasing deals and power, yet this woman had shown him what real courage looked like. Determined to meet the boy, Richard told his driver to prepare the car. When he mentioned visiting the orphanage, Maria's face drained of color. "Please, sir," she whispered, "don't let them take him away again." "I won't," Richard promised. "I just want to see him. I give you my word." St. Bridget's Orphanage stood on a lonely hill outside the city, a crumbling building surrounded by wild grass and forgotten toys. Children's laughter echoed faintly through the courtyard, pure and unaware of the world's cruelties. A nun welcomed them, her hands clasped and smile tired. "You're here for Gabriel?" she asked softly. Maria nodded, holding her breath. When Gabriel appeared, the air itself seemed to still. He was small for his age, his dark hair curling at the ends, and his eyes, those eyes, stopped Richard in his tracks. They were hauntingly familiar, deep gray with flecks of gold. The same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. A strange shiver ran through him, but he brushed it off. "No one should cry alone in the rain." Gabriel approached shyly and hid behind Maria's skirt. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said gently. "This is Mr. Hale. He helped with your medicine." The boy looked up, uncertain, then whispered, "Thank you." His voice was soft, but it struck something inside Richard he couldn't name. As the nun handed over some medical papers, one of the pages slipped loose and fell to the ground. Richard bent to pick it up, and his eyes caught the name on the file. Gabriel Hale. He froze. "Why does he have my surname?" he asked quietly. Maria's face turned white. The nun looked at her in confusion. "You didn't tell him?" "Tell me what?" Richard demanded. Maria's voice broke as she whispered, "He was left here 10 years ago. The orphanage said his mother died giving birth. The note that came with him, it only said his name, Gabriel Hale." For a moment the world tilted. 10 years ago. That was the year his fiancée, Claire, disappeared after telling him she was pregnant. The pieces clicked together so violently that Richard's knees almost gave out. "No," he muttered, taking a step back. His chest felt hollow. "That's impossible." Maria reached for him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't know, sir. I swear I didn't. I found him and couldn't leave him there. Please believe me." Richard's vision blurred. The child who had called her mother was his own son. The boy she had saved from the streets was the blood he never knew he had. Gabriel looked between them, confused and frightened by the sudden tension. Richard knelt down, his voice trembling. "Hey, Gabriel, how old are you?" "7, sir." 7. Born exactly the year Claire vanished. Richard's throat closed. "You look just like someone I used to love," he whispered, brushing the boy's hair from his eyes. That night, back at the mansion, Richard couldn't sleep. The truth echoed in every corner of his soul. Maria had saved his son, raised him with love when he himself had been blind to his existence. He sat in the dark, realizing that fate had brought her into his life not by chance, but to give him back what he had lost, and perhaps to teach him what love truly meant. The rain returned that night, soft and endless, drumming against the mansion's windows like a reminder of everything that had changed. Richard sat in his study, staring at the photograph of Gabriel, his heart torn between wonder and dread. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same faint birthmark near the jaw. The truth had been standing in front of him all along, disguised as fate. He poured a glass of whiskey, though his hands trembled too much to lift it. Claire's name echoed in his thoughts. Her laughter, her sudden disappearance, and the unanswered question that had haunted him for a decade. Why did she leave? Now he knew. She hadn't run from him. She died bringing his son into the world. And somehow, the universe had delivered that child back into his life through a woman who had nothing but love to give. Maria knocked softly at the door. "Mr. Hale? May I speak to you?" "Come in," he said hoarsely. She stepped inside, her eyes red from crying. "I shouldn't have hidden it from you. I was afraid. I thought you'd hate me for lying." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't lie out of greed, Maria. You lied out of love. You saved him when no one else would." She looked down. "When I found him, he was so small. He wouldn't stop crying. The orphanage was overcrowded. I begged them to let me take him home. They said no, unless I claimed he was mine. So I did. I never meant to steal anyone's child. I just couldn't walk away." Richard's throat tightened. "You didn't steal him. You saved my son." Maria's eyes widened, confusion flickering into disbelief. "What do you mean?" "Gabriel is my child, Maria. His mother was the woman I was going to marry, Claire. She died the night he was born. I never knew what happened to the baby until now." Silence filled the room like a living thing. Maria's lips parted, but no words came. Tears welled again, this time out of heartbreak, not fear. "I swear to you I didn't know," she whispered. "I believe you," Richard said, his voice raw. "If anything, I owe you everything. You gave him a life. You gave me a son." They stood there for a long time, neither speaking. The storm outside grew louder, as if echoing their turmoil. Maria finally asked, "What happens now? Will you take him from me?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Richard felt his heart twist. The thought of tearing Gabriel away from the only mother he'd ever known was unbearable. "No," he said firmly. "You're his mother too, in every way that matters." Over the next few days, they worked quietly to adjust to the truth. Richard contacted his lawyers to start the process of legal guardianship, ensuring Maria would never lose her place in Gabriel's life. Every morning, Gabriel arrived at the mansion for lessons and breakfast, and every evening, Maria tucked him into bed with stories that made him laugh again. Yet despite the peace that had begun to grow, Richard knew something still weighed on Maria's heart. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, he found her sitting on the back steps, staring at the horizon. "You saved him, Richard," she said quietly. "Not me." He shook his head. "You're wrong. I gave him a name, maybe, but you gave him love, and that's something money could never buy." That night, as Gabriel slept between them on the couch, his small hands clutching both theirs, Richard finally understood the lesson he'd been blind to his entire life. Family wasn't built by blood or fortune. It was built by sacrifice, compassion, and second chances. All gifts that Maria had given without asking for anything in return. Months passed, and the mansion no longer felt like a fortress of loneliness. Laughter returned to its halls, the kind that belonged to children and to hearts learning to heal. Gabriel ran freely now, filling every room with light. For Richard, each day brought a new kind of peace, one that success had never given him. But life, as he'd learned, rarely offers peace without testing it. One morning, Maria collapsed in the kitchen. The clatter of dishes and her faint cry brought everyone running. When Richard reached her side, her skin was pale and her breathing shallow. "Maria!" he shouted, cradling her head. Her lips moved weakly. "Please, don't let him see me like this." "Call an ambulance," Richard barked, his voice breaking. At the hospital, the diagnosis came like thunder. Severe pneumonia, worsened by exhaustion and untreated infection. "She must have been ignoring symptoms for weeks," the doctor said. "She's strong, but she's been overworking herself." Richard's hands shook as he signed every paper the doctor placed before him. He would pay for the best care, whatever it took, but money suddenly felt useless, too small against the fear of losing her. Days blurred into nights. Richard stayed by her side, barely leaving the chair by her bed. He read to her softly when she was unconscious, told her stories about Gabriel's drawings and the way he missed her laugh. "You saved my boy," he whispered one night, voice trembling. "Now let me save you." When Maria finally opened her eyes, her voice was weak but steady. "How long have I been here?" "5 days," he said, exhaling in relief. She smiled faintly. "And Gabriel?" "He's home. He made you a card. It says, 'My 2 parents, one with a tie, one with an apron.'" Her eyes filled with tears. "He called me his parent?" Richard nodded, smiling through his own. "He's right. You are." He took her hand. "Maria, when you get better, I want something to change. You and Gabriel aren't my employees anymore. Your family. This house is your home." She tried to protest, but her voice failed. "You don't owe me that." "I owe you everything," he said. "You gave my son love before I even knew he existed. You gave me back my humanity. That's something no amount of wealth could buy." As spring arrived, Maria recovered slowly. Each day, Gabriel brought her flowers from the garden, insisting they were magic medicine. Richard often watched from the doorway, realizing he was witnessing something holy, the rebirth of a family that destiny had nearly stolen. On the first warm evening of May, they all sat outside together. The air smelled of wet grass and hope. Gabriel leaned his head against Maria's shoulder. "Mom," he said sleepily, "do you think the rain still remembers us?" Maria smiled. "Maybe it does, sweetheart. Maybe it remembers the night everything changed." Richard looked at them both, his heart full. "If it does," he said softly, "it's because that rain washed away the loneliness and gave us each other." The moon rose above them, silver and silent, And in that quiet moment, as the boy drifted to sleep between the two people who loved him most, the storm that once tore their lives apart finally ended. All that remained was peace, fragile, beautiful, and real. The rain came again weeks later, soft and calm this time. Not the storm that once hid tears, but a gentle echo of everything they had overcome. Richard stood by the window, watching the droplets trace paths down the glass, and thought of how far they had come. Once, he had been a man surrounded by walls and wealth, untouched by emotion. Now, love had made him human again. Maria stepped beside him, holding 2 cups of tea. Her eyes met his, warm and alive. "Funny," she said quietly, "how the rain used to mean sadness, and now it feels like grace." He smiled. "That's because it brought you to me." She looked down, blushing softly. "No, Richard, it brought us to each other." Outside, Gabriel laughed as he ran barefoot through the puddles, the sound of his joy echoing through the garden like music. Richard watched him and realized something profound. Life's greatest riches aren't measured in gold, but in the hearts we choose to love. And somewhere in that gentle rain, the world seemed to whisper what fate had already written, that sometimes the people who enter our lives quietly are the ones who save us completely.